All right, let's talk about something that's pretty much baked into our collective consciousness: nuclear accidents. We all know the fear, right? But what if our response to that fear has its own hidden dangers? Okay, let's dive in. It's funny how these words have seeped into our everyday language. We talk about a stock market meltdown or the political fallout from some big decision. It just goes to show you how much the nuclear age has really captured our imagination. But what happens when it's not a metaphor? What happens when a reactor actually melts down and creates real fallout?
So, to really get our heads around this, we have to look at the two big ones. The two accidents that basically shaped everything we think we know about nuclear risk. The two worst in history.
Both of these disasters were rated what's called an INES Level 7. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's the absolute highest level on the scale. It's officially a major accident. Think a massive, out-of-control release of radioactive material, with really, really widespread effects on people's health and the environment. It's basically the worst-case scenario.
So you've got Chernobyl, back in 1986, when a reactor just blew apart in what was then Soviet Ukraine. And then, a whole quarter century later, you have Fukushima in Japan in 2011, a massive earthquake, a devastating tsunami, and multiple reactor meltdowns. And in both of these catastrophes, the immediate playbook was exactly the same.
And that brings us to the evacuation imperative. In both of these cases, the authorities had one primary goal, one main tool to protect everyone: get people out. Just move huge numbers of people away from the area, and do it as fast as humanly possible. Just look at the numbers for Chernobyl. A mind-boggling 335,000 people were relocated. They set up this huge exclusion zone, and for almost everyone, that was it. It was a one-way trip. They never went back home. The sheer scale of that is just hard to even comprehend.
And guess what? We saw the exact same thing happen at Fukushima. After that disaster, 111,000 people were officially ordered to leave their homes. But on top of that, another 49,000 just left on their own. So you're talking about 160,000 people, their lives totally uprooted. And, on the face of it, this sounds like the only thing you could do, right? It just seems like common sense.
But here's where things get really interesting. Because now, with decades of data to look back on, researchers are starting to ask, a pretty uncomfortable question.
And it's a bombshell of a question, really. What if that primary tool, the one thing we rely on to protect people, mass evacuation, what if it actually does more harm than good? To try and answer that, scientists use this thing called the J-value method. Basically, it's a way to put numbers on a decision. It balances the cost of a safety measure, like an evacuation, against how much longer people will actually live because of it. Here's the key takeaway. If the J-value is less than 1, the action is worth it. It does more good than harm. But if it's over 1, then you might be causing a bigger problem than the one you're trying to solve.
And when they ran the numbers, the results were, wow. Just startling. Get this. For the people who were moved from the most contaminated areas around Chernobyl in a later relocation, if they had just stayed put, they would have lost, on average, about 3 months of life expectancy. Now, hold that number in your head, because the average person living in London loses 4.5 months just from air pollution. And even crazier, there's an 8.6-year life expectancy gap between being born in different neighborhoods in the UK. Suddenly, that radiation risk starts to look different, doesn't it?
And when they looked at Fukushima, the conclusion was even more blunt. Using this J-value method, the researchers said it's actually really difficult to justify moving anyone away from the area, at least not on the grounds of radiation protection alone. The numbers just didn't support it.
So, if the risk from the radiation itself was maybe not what we thought, what about the hidden costs of the safety measure, the evacuation? Well, it turns out they're huge. We're talking immediate tragedy, long-term sickness, and even ecological chaos.
Let's start with the most immediate, heartbreaking cost. During the rush to evacuate hospitals and nursing homes in Fukushima, more than 50 elderly patients died. And they didn't die from radiation. They died from things like hypothermia, dehydration, the sheer shock and chaos of being moved.
But the problems didn't stop there. The long-term effects on the people who were moved were just devastating. Study after study of the evacuees found huge spikes in all kinds of problems. We're talking high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity. And the psychological toll? It was immense. Sky-high rates of anxiety, depression, PTSD, all driven by the trauma of losing their homes, their communities, their entire way of life.
And then there's the stuff nobody saw coming. the impact on the environment. Once the humans were gone, the evacuation zones basically went wild. Nature took over. And one animal in particular absolutely thrived in this new human-free world.
Wild boars. I'm not kidding. The number of boars being trapped by farmers in the Fukushima area went through the roof after 2011. With no people around, their population just exploded. And that created a whole new set of problems for the people still living on the edges of these zones.
All right, so where does this leave us? What does all this tell us about how we should handle the next major disaster? Well, the research is pretty clear. We need a whole new way of thinking about risk.
And maybe the guiding light for this new approach should be a simple principle from the International Commission on Radiological Protection. It's called the Principle of Justification, and it's so powerful in its simplicity. Whatever you do, any measure you take, it should do more good than harm. Period.
So what does that look like in practice, this new framework? Well, first it means you have to balance the radiological risks with all the non-radiological risks. You have to weigh the danger of radiation against the very real danger of uprooting people's lives. It means we need to stop using these super conservative, one-size-fits-all evacuation rules. And at the end of the day, it means we have to consider the full human cost, the social, the psychological, the economic fallout of every single choice we make.
And this isn't some radical new idea. This way of thinking fits perfectly with big global goals, like the UN's Sustainable Development Goal for good health and well-being. That goal recognizes that being healthy isn't just about not having a disease, it's also about your mental and social well-being.
And all of this really leaves us with one final crucial question to ponder. When a disaster strikes, when everyone is scared and nothing is certain, how do we protect people? Not just from the initial danger itself, but from our own response to it. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.